this is a world where the notion of composer does not exist. You know, if you're singing, you are creating something. They thought for a long time that Pope Gregory had composed Gregorian chant, but of course he lives around the year 600, so of course it's more of a mythical and political attribution.
My understanding was that there was all these traditions and he sort of forced a universality to it so that everyone would sort of sing the same everywhere, and then over time this sort of gets attributed to him, and like notation was sort of a byproduct of this because they had to innovate a way of notating so that then everyone could learn the same chant, so that there wasn't vast dissimilarities between different parts of the Christian empire.
I would say you're very on quite dated historiography. So this is really exactly how it used to be told.
Was there ever a point then where basically universally in Christendom they were singing the same chants?
Never. And nobody ever really wanted that. The only moment that it happens is with this Pius X motu proprio, Inter Sollicitudines, in 1903. They foster this aesthetic revolution of the Gregorian chant that we know nowadays, which is the fruit of the work of the Solesmes monks, which is an abbey in north of France. Those monks say, we can make a book that everybody can use everywhere with a very simple method of singing.
And that's what, the Liber Usualis?
It is.
So was there a Liber Usualis before Solesmes? Sorry to interrupt.
Never. No, I mean, every place was attached to their own manner, to their own feasts, to their own propers.
Lumen ad revelationem gentium et gloriam pleristo a Israel, quia viderunt oculi mei, salutare tuum. Lumen ad revelationem gentium et gloriam plebisto a Israel.
Bruno de Labriolle, thank you for being here today. It's I've seen a ton of your stuff on Instagram.
Wow.
And I've been following you for a couple years now. And so I've had this project of, I really want to interview an expert of every major Christian chant tradition. And so I've started with some of the more obscure chant traditions, like Coptic. I mean, it's not obscure if you're Coptic, but if you're not Coptic, no one knows anything about Coptic chant or Malankaren Syriac chant or Carpatho-Rusyn, But I have yet to actually do Gregorian chant. And so my deepest desire is whenever I do Gregorian chant, I want to interview Bruno de Labriolle, because I've seen all of his videos. He has this folk way of singing Gregorian chant. It sounds awesome. And in some ways it almost sounds kind of Eastern. There's more similarity to like Orthodox chant in the way that you sing chant than perhaps like the Solesmes method. So anyway, all of that to say, it's a big honor, and thank you for being here.
No, thanks so much for having me. I'm really glad. When you wrote me and I saw how many interesting people you interview with your podcast, I was really, really glad and honored. I listened to the Ethiopian deacon that you had on your channel. I don't remember his name, but to show how things are going on in this place is really a source of inspiration. So that's for sure. I would say we are in this strange situation where we know so much is happening in many places, and I can imagine that 100 years ago it would have been difficult to be in contact with an Ethiopian deacon who could tell us about everything. And now we have access to this, and yet we do not, I would say, research as much our own traditions. And I know that you're a very talented musician. I did listen to your organ album, which I really enjoyed. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much.
And it's always this strange situation where we can go very far into the music world and know so well, the works of Bach and of other different kinds of people. And then you go to their concerts, and the music is amazing, but the Gregorian chant part, we have to face it, is kind of boring, and the people that do it, they also know it in some sense. And so usually they just do the first stanza, in Gregorian chant, so that you have this historical curiosity. And then all the other stanzas, they just sing with their motet, manner. So yeah, if you have paid attention to what I do, you know that what I do doesn't have so many friends, I would say, in the Gregorian chant world, which is too bad. Myself, I'm not by myself. I'm within a specific tradition.
And what would that tradition be called?
Well, it would be difficult to say, but the way that I usually advertise it, I would say, is to sing Gregorian chant and to understand Gregorian chant as one of the traditional repertoire of sacred European music. And so to understand it not as an isolated repertoire, but really linked with other sacred folk traditions and also with other modal music repertoire. So the people that I have before me, I would say, the main one, of course, the most famous one is Marcel Pérès, who is the founder and leader of Ensemble Organum. They started in the 80s, and their work focused on the links with Byzantine music. They worked a lot with Lycurgos Angelopoulos, who is, of course, famous Byzantine singer who had his fair share of disagreements in his own country. He also worked a lot with Corsican singers. Of course, Corsica being this island that is south of France, and that has this very specific situation politically and historically because it's been in the hands of different governments. And it used to be in the hands of northern Italy. And then in the 18th century, it was bought by France. The fun story is that it was bought by France just 1 year before Napoleon was born. So he made a career in the French army. But if he had been born a year before, it would not have been the case, and probably would have fought against the French armies in the European coalition. And so they have kept, this insular situation that they have means that they have kept their identity in this diglossia situation, where you have your own language, and when the administrative language is a different one. So it's not to say that they have kept, of course, medieval practices or something, that they're exactly how it sounded back then. It's not the case. It's just to say that we can see in the manner that they have of understanding music similarities with the way it was being taught. So the main thing is being taught only through oral transmission. The most famous recording by Ensemble Organum is when they recorded La Messe de Notre-Dame by Guillaume de Machaut, who is the most famous composer of Ars Nova in the 14th century. And since it is very famous, it had been recorded by so many ensembles before. And it's amazing music, so every recording is beautiful. But it was, of course, being sung by singers who had been taught, in a very academic manner, and for whom these scores are just a different sort of notation, but it's still a score. And so Marcel Pérès, his idea was to say, what happens if I give this score to people who do not read scores, who were never taught to read scores? So those Corsican singers or really talented in improvisation, be it poetic or musical. And for them, they really understand that you have, I would say, rendezvous points in the music. And your job as a singer is to make it alive between those rendezvous points, is how do you go from one to another? And this is where your expertise really shows. And so he told me that...
including ornamentation and that sort of thing.
Definitely. Yeah. Which has a very strong element of inheritance. You inherit a way of ornamenting, but also you do it in a way that is different from the next village. And that is also different from your singers, depending on if you're singing bass, if you're singing la segunda, which is the middle voice, which is the most important voice, or if you're singing la terza, which is the higher one. All of these things made them really capable of doing something very unusual. And so he told me that he spent 1 week trying to teach them the first Kyrie, the first notation in the first Kyrie, which is like a 1.5 minute piece. But just for them to understand this Ars Nova, music and notation. And so it really took a while. But then the recording that they made, and now it's 30 years old, there is no other recording that is like this. And this is something that we really value it, which is that you receive something, when you sing it, people recognize, and yet it's really an act of creation. Nobody has ever done it like this. And when you sing it in the recording and in concerts and in the next concert and the next concert, you're always doing it in a way that is expected to be only in this instant. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, with classical music. I think we've so gotten into the habit of looking at a score and thinking, this is exactly what the composer wants. I can't stray from the notation. I have to do it exactly as they wrote. And so all of these people are just absolutely slaves to the score. Whereas even in the early 20th century, even with composers who pretty much meant what they wrote, you listen to Vladimir Horowitz play Rachmaninoff or Beethoven, he's adding some stuff. And so, perhaps the farther you go back, it's like the more the ornamentation and improvisation was sort of expected in the performance practice. And I think maybe people today don't really take that for granted. And so you're playing Bach and you start like adding figurations and stuff. People are like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, Bach totally would have done that. He would have improvised the pieces that you're listening to right now. So, so it seems like it's sort of the same methodology, but sort of applied to Gregorian chant. Am I right?
You are. Yeah. I would say the idea is that the world where Gregorian chant coalesces comes into being as one of many other liturgical repertoire, because of course in this time it was just one of many. It was very regional. This is a world where the notion of composer does not exist. If you're singing, you are creating something. The score always comes afterwards. First you have this improvisation movement. You have somebody who does something great. And then it is written down. But it is written down after several times. And it's not necessarily written down exactly as it was being sung. And mostly it's not being written down as a score. It's written down as something to help the memory. Because when you see, of course it's a period where you write on animal skin. And, and the cost of this and the time that it takes, everything is very expensive. So you have very little copies. And the copy that you have is very precious. So it is in the cupboard. And so before the feast, the choir master, he goes to the cupboard, he opens, he just refreshes his memory, because some of the pieces you just sing once per year. So, and then he's like, oh yeah, of course. He closes it. He goes to the choir when the bell rings, and then he intones the piece. And the way that he intones it which is of course very modal, immediately refreshes the memory of everybody else. And of course, they do not have books. They know it by heart because of practical manner, because there's no other way. But of course, also because it is expected of you. This is what you're being taught. And so immediately everybody sings like that. So so it's really, what is the point of a score? You know, what is it here for? We have this, of course, in music, because Gregorian chant, of course, is not in the Bible, so it begins as improvisation. But many other parts of the Mass are like this. You know, the Eucharistic prayer, for example. We know that in the first centuries, it was also improvised. And this is why we have very different ones across traditions. You have, as always, you have themes that you're expected to go through. But just as in any traditional art, I would say, the one who improvises on the spot something that is amazing, that nobody has ever heard put this way before, is somebody who is believed to be in touch with the divinity, you know? So, and then of course, as time goes by, you know, there's some suspicion that goes in it. And so they say, we are afraid that improvising means that you're going to do something, you know, that is just whatever comes through your mind. And so we're going to write down and then have more and more, you know, like precise things. But what we see for music is the same that we see in other parts of the Mass. We can say, of course, it's for the better. But we can also take a look at, you know, how much of this breathing of the Spirit is lost in this. And so, you know, this Ethiopian deacon saying that they have actually a curriculum of people who are expected to improvise, you know, it really feels like those people in those places, for them, the golden age is not over. You know, it's because it's so much alive, and because there are people who can do it well and people who can appreciate it. And I believe that now we really have this interaction just with Bach music, you know, and you come and you want to hear what you heard the year before, you know, and you hope that the person will not do it too much in their own style. And if they're singing along, oh my God, you know, just like Glenn Gould did. It's you know, it's really like, what is he doing? You know, it doesn't make any sense, and it's bothering us. We do not receive it as somebody who is infused by the music. But yeah,
I have a love-hate relationship with Glenn Gould.
I can imagine,
because it's amazing, and sometimes it's really convincing. I don't think it's very historically accurate, but I gotta give him credit, you know. It's
yeah.
So,
but we can talk about what it means to be historically accurate, because of course this is a period when he plays it's in full force in the Baroque music, and you know, there's really a 60s element to it, which is the way we've been doing it is, you know, kind of all wrong, and it's too much entangled with 19th century and 20th century practices, and we need to understand better the conditions of this music coming into being. And so it really makes a lot of sense, of course. But then again, we have this element, as we said, of improvisation being a natural part of it, and the piece that is written is just a testimony of what you can do, but it's not expected that you're going to do it exactly like this.
I think iconography was probably the same way, in that now, as there's like a resurgence of iconography, especially like in the Eastern Church, when people start out, they tend to slavishly copy stuff, and so they're not really improvising or innovating. But if you look at all the really ancient iconography, it's sometimes wildly different from place to place, but there's a language. So they know, oh, I need to paint Christ with Mary, and she needs to have a veil, and there's Maybe even there's like the star on each shoulder. There's a prototype, but how it looks could be vastly different, and they're not signing their name. It's so it itself is artistic creativity, but it's within a form. And so I perhaps this is the way like Gregorian chant was,
Definitely. Yeah. The thing, of course, is that we do not have authorship for most of the pieces, because, of course, music notation is invented around the year between the 9th and the 10th century. And even the stave, as you know, by Guido d'Arezzo, is even in the 11th century. And the centuries that we talk about this coming into being of the liturgical chant, well, of course, you have different steps, but talking about Gregorian chant, it's the 8th century, which is linked with Old Roman chant, which is 6th century. And this is why, when they thought for a long time that Pope Gregory had composed Gregorian chant,
right.
But of course, he lives around the year 600. So what does it mean to attribute authorship and even to compose something when there is no way of writing music? So of course, it's more of a mythical and political attribution.
Right. Wasn't he sort of more of a, maybe I'm totally wrong, but I'd love your opinion. My understanding was that there was all these traditions and he sort of forced a universality to it so that everyone would sort of sing the same everywhere. And then over time, this sort of gets attributed to him. And like notation was sort of a byproduct of this because they had to innovate a way of notating so that then everyone could learn the same chant, so that there wasn't vast dissimilarities between different parts of the Christian empire. Am I totally off on that? That's my understanding of sort of the formation of Gregorian chant.
I would say you're very on quite dated historiography. So this is really exactly how it used to be told.
Feel free to correct me. Yeah.
Yeah. No, of course, it's something that fascinates me. From the sources that we have, we know that Pope Gregory had very little impact on music. He did have some impact when he's kind of credited with the creation of not the creation, but like the officialization and structuration of this Schola Cantorum, which is a corporation of singers in Rome. But what he did exactly is not is related to how celebrated he was as a pope, because he is, of course, the first pope who used to be a monk, and he also is credited with structurizing the church in a moment that was quite difficult for her. And so he has a very, very good reputation. So the story of Gregorian chant happens later. It happens around the year 750. When Pippin the Short, who is about to become a king of the Franks, he is getting dissatisfied with the Merovingians, which is the previous dynasty. And in this dynasty, you become a king by election of the aristocracy. Of course, he, not being part of the aristocracy, has no way of becoming the future king. But he is gaining power and power and power. So what he does is that he shaves the head which was of the last Merovingian king, which was, of course, the big shame element, and he sends him to a monastery. And then he makes a pact with the Pope of the time, the Pope has his own agenda. The Pope is still under the power of the Eastern Roman Emperor, because in Ravenna, they still have a government there. And also you have the Lombards, you have barbarians that are above. And so he's kind of scared of the situation. He would like the help of the new powerful French king. Pippin the Short says, okay, I will send armies to defeat and to give you autonomy if you come to my court and you anoint me, saying that my legitimacy does not come from aristocracy, but comes from above, and you make my dynasty hereditary. And also you bring cantors with you, so that the music, liturgical music that is in my kingdom that is too Merovingian, that I do not like, which is called now Gallican chant. Pippin the Short says, I want to erase that. I want it to be replaced by Roman song, because Rome is the source of legitimacy for me, who is German, you know, and he felt himself as a barbarian. So the Pope comes with cantors. We know that he stays for a long time. And so the difficulty for him is that there is no rite of king anointment at the time. So he takes the book of the anointment of bishops and he just, you know, like adapts it. But for them, for Pippin the Short, it's to say, now I am just like David, you know, I'm the father of a new chosen people. And also the Pope, at this time, and the Curia, they make this fake document, this forgery called Constantine donation. Maybe you know about this story.
Right, yes.
And he says, actually, there's papal states were given to us by Constantine. See this document, you know, so the Eastern emperor should just leave us alone. So everybody is winning something in this situation. And so, of course, the singers from Pippin the Short, from his court, some of them are okay with learning this new song. But of course, if you're just singing by heart, if you've already learned by heart, what does it mean to learn something new? If you're 60 years old, you know, you've been singing by heart for all your life. And then somebody comes and says, now I'm teaching you something else. Even if you're the best, even if you have the best goodwill in the world, you can retain a new text. You can retain a general structure of the melody. But of course, it will still be shaped by your own savoir-faire, your own way of going from one note to another. And of course, for the cantors who do not have this goodwill, who says Pippin the Short is a usurper, I do not want to sing just like they do in Rome, we have our own traditions. Well, to this man you can say, this song is actually composed by Pope Gregory. So, you know, it's not just the will of somebody living right now. It's somebody that everybody agrees on, that he has a great reputation. And so it's really this political term that covers this reality of a song, which is actually this cross-fertilization between Gallican cantors and what we call now Old Roman chant. So, and this is what we call Gregorian chant.
So it's the mixture of the two.
For sure. Yeah. So this is not to say that it is 100% how it happened, but this is the main hypothesis nowadays.
Hello, everyone. Would you please consider supporting me on Patreon? I'm really enjoying making this podcast as a means of having interesting conversations with people in the arts and those who are interested in promoting beauty, especially in the liturgical arts. But I'm also doing this as a means of trying to help support my family. So if you would prayerfully consider supporting me on Patreon, it would mean the world to me. The first 20 people in the United States who sign up at any financial level, be that the $5 level or above, will get a free copy of my CD, Bach's Organ Mass, recorded on the Trost organ in Waltershausen. Thank you for your support.
Okay, so I know there's like Gallican chant, Mozarabic chant, Ambrosian chant. How does Mozarabic and Ambrosian fit into the equation? Are these just later regional varieties, or were they also significant at this time with King Pippin the Short?
They were also significant, definitely. I mean, every place has their own source of authority, you know. So in the Iberic Peninsula, they have, of course, Saint James as an apostle, and you know, every place has their own either apostles who evangelize them, or you have Saint Ambrose in Milan, you have Saint Benedict in the Duchy of Benevent, which is south of Italy. In many places you have specific traditions, but the names really, they serve to cover a very, very strange reality. Of course, Mozarabic now, we have some people when we sing, they want to say it feels Eastern, and so they say it sounds Mozarabic. They do not really know what the word means, but there is Arabic in it, so they think, maybe it's, so Mozarab is the name that was given to Christians living under Al-Andalus in the first millennium, and actually their situation was not so difficult as we tend to imagine. They could be, quite wealthy and connected people, and they were allowed to keep practicing their rites. But of course, so what is the extent of the cross-fertilization for these people? When you're, of course, under a different religious rule, but you're always interacting with others. So that's difficult to say because the manuscripts that we have, which are pneumatic, which means, so with this first millennium notation, they were never transcribed on staves in the 11th century because the Clunisian order got invited in the Christian duchies at this time. I don't know if they're duchies, but like the new Catholic kings, and the Clunisian order sings Gregorian chant. So they bring their own Gregorian chant, and they make it, this Mozarabic chant, kind of disappear, almost disappear. And then,
how much of it is still extant? Sorry to interrupt, but can we hear? I mean, I know that, and I think it's Marcel Pérès who's done a couple albums, right, of Mozarabic chant. And so how much really is out there of what we could say this is truly Mozarabic?
It's very difficult because, once again, what do we mean when we say Mozarabic? Do we mean it is sung by these people? Or do we mean it is this exact sound identity? It's for some parts, in some parts it was still being sung in some places. The main books that we have now of Mozarabic chant were kind of written / composed / transcribed. It is difficult to know at the end of the 15th century, because of course it's the political zeitgeist, I would say, that you have this Reconquista, and so they want to say we have found again the songs that used to be sung under this foreign rule. But how close are those books which are notated in this very Renaissance manner, in cantus factus approach? What is the relationship between these books and the books and the song that were sung in this Visigothic period, of the 5th and 6th century in this Iberic Peninsula? Nobody can really know. But the thing is, it's the same with Gregorian chant. Once again, I don't have the book here, it's in the other room, but when we say Gregorian chant, do we mean the song that used to be sung in the Middle Ages? Or do we mean any Latin piece that is in the book and that has liturgical function? Because of course, now in places where they say they really care about Gregorian chant, in the traditionalist world, the pieces that you hear the most, this Kyriale de Angelis and this Salve Regina, they are 17th century compositions. But they're still in the book and nobody really knows. For example, we're recording this on December 4th. December 8th is the Immaculate Conception feast, but this is a very recent feast. So the proper for this feast have been composed in the 19th century because there was no need for those pieces before, and now there is. So sometimes you can find ideas, pre-existing pieces that could work, or you can write a new text and make this contrafactum, which is you take a previous melody and you just put it on your new text. But sometimes it's also just created ex nihilo. So,
Wow.
so it's really to say Gregorian chant is a very polysemic word, and to some extent it's too bad because there is a lot of misunderstanding going on. But I think it's really for this reason that it survives. It's because every epoch, every era has people taking something away or putting something new in it, but it still has this legitimacy and reputation. And
Sure.
and moreover, going deeper than just the text and the melody attached to it, the way that you sing it has been a debate at every era. Every century has people disagreeing on how do you sing this, how do you sing that, etc.
Yeah, I want to talk about your method, but just to summarize, or to sort of ask, a few rounding out questions. So, was there ever a point then where basically universally in Christendom they were singing the same chants?
Never. And
Okay.
nobody ever really wanted that. The only moment that it happens is with this Pius X motu proprio, inter sollicitudines, in 1903, but for very specific reasons, because, the church is losing political and temporal power and wants to have more spiritual power. And so they foster this aesthetic revolution of the Gregorian chant that we know nowadays, which is the fruit of the work of the Solesmes monks, which is an abbey in north of France. Those monks say, we can make a small book that everybody can use everywhere with a very simple method of singing.
And that's what, the Liber Usualis?
It is.
So was there a Liber Usualis before Solesmes? Sorry to interrupt.
Never. No, I mean, every place was attached to their own manner, to their own feasts, to their own propers. In France, in the 19th century, and it was the case for a long time, less than a third of the dioceses were following the Roman Rite. You have less than another third who were following the Parisian Rite, and all the other dioceses had their own rites. Of course, I was in Lyon. The Lyonese Rite is another famous one. So you really have this situation where people stop to believe that this is good, and they start to believe that we need to be one. Another big change is that we do not pronounce Latin in the same manner as we used to do in France. Now, of course, in church, almost everywhere they say it in this Italianese fashion, except in Germany countries, they have a different way of saying it.
The Germanate Latin, yeah.
Yeah. But up until Pius X reforms, we were saying Latin words in a very different way, and we still have Latin words in the everyday French. You do not say the same. For example, we say ultimatum, and if we were in church, we would say ultimatum, and even ultimatum. So, so it's really a moment where they say, now we need everybody to have this, and a book for everybody, and a small book at this. Because, of course, the previous way of singing, you had this big book, everybody is looking at the same, but now it's, so you have this change.
I was in a concert where they were trying to reenact the coronation of King George, and so they had all of the singers like shout out "Vivat Regina," but they did it in the English, so they all said "Vivat, Vivat Regina."
Well, of course, it
and
sounds.
I was like, maybe that's what they did.
Yeah, I mean, when you're not from that country, it does sound. Of course, it always sounds fun because it sounds like an accent, like a specific accent. But it made a lot of sense, and mostly we could not know. You had to travel there to know that they were doing it differently.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you had no way of knowing it. So it's
so like the Lord's Prayer, like the da 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 dum da 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 dum. There was like you go back to the 1400s. That's not like a universal chant. Like you wouldn't find that in both England, France, Germany, Spain. Like they'd have their own Paternoster chant. Or are there some that are sort of prototypical where like, okay, this Sanctus, this Kyrie, these have a form that's recognized everywhere, but there's just a lot of variation. So like just trying to see how much variation versus how much similarity was there.
So the Paternoster, it's a very good question. Nowadays there are 3 ways of singing it that are in the book. So you have this one. You have also Paternoster qui es in celis, and you have Paternoster qui es in celis. So you have those coexisting forms. It's kind of specific because I think that I don't believe that in parishes they used to sing it. I think that it's such a priest thing to say. I wouldn't really know about this, but it's a good question because it's really specific. We have some things that we know were very widespread. For example, this Sanctus 18. Sanctus, Sanctus, because it used to, the preface and the Eucharistic prayer used to be one. And so the Sanctus for a very long time was just very simple and sung by everybody just in the middle of it. You did not have this Sanctus so big that even the Benedictus had to be sung after elevation because they didn't have time to do it, which you see in Baroque Neo-Gallican French. There's this, the Kyriale is the most regional, and it's even sometimes to the level of parishes. Because since it's an assembly song, of course, in the post-Tridentine world, it's kind of difficult to make people learn something. So when in one place they know something, they sing it a lot. But in other places, so the Kyriale that we now have in the book is also the fruit of the work of a committee happening at the same time in the beginning of the 20th century. And they're choosing, which Kyrie they like the best, which one can fit. Some, the Kyriale Cunctipotens, of course, is very famous, but others are almost unica. The idea is that it's regional because it's expected to be regional, and also because there's no way that it can be not regional. What is regional? Not the texts, of course. The texts can be unified across the Roman Catholic Church. Every Christmas Day, you sing Puer Natus Est, that's for sure. But the way you sing it changes. Nowadays, they have a lot of, there's so many people trying to work on the oldest manuscripts that we have, that are in St. Gallen in Switzerland. Maybe you know these manuscripts. Even in the book now, you have this square notation, and then you have the St. Gallen neumes under. And people think that if you sing it, if we try to understand how those neumes could sound, then you can understand how Gregorian chant really used to be. And our position is to say that St. Gallen is a very specific place. The manuscripts are in very good condition because it's a place in Switzerland that has never been invaded. And of course, the area in the north of France has been devastated by so many wars. So much has burned. So there's this. It's also that it's complete manuscripts. Because of this, it's very precise in the way that it's written, very systematic. And you have, letters that can give more nuance to the idea, provided that we agree on what this letter actually means from a vocal perspective. But in this same monastery, different manuscripts from different centuries do not notate the same thing. Within the same manuscripts, they do not always notate the same melody. And within the same melody, you can sometimes see that something has been erased and changed. And they put the C for celeriter, which means go a little faster. And then, so it's added. You can see the ink is a little different. And then you see another hand added an M for mediocriter, which means actually not. Do not accelerate too much here. So there's this back and forth. And even if we could agree on how it sounds, which is not the case, if you listen to recordings, they disagree on how to interpret it. But even if we could agree on this, we could get close to one specific way of singing it. But okay. I'm not trying to sing like they used to sing in Switzerland in the 10th century.
Right.
I'm trying to sing as I sing today because today is the liturgy is happening, and you have to be here. You have to celebrate. You have to praise.
Well, let me ask. So, like de Grigny, when he's writing these big, massive organ pieces that are based on chant, which he just kind of puts, with the whole alternatum practice, which I also have a host of questions about because it's very confusing, or even Bach, he's Lutheran. But they're also using Gregorian chant melodies, like the In Dulce Jubilo. So, like, if I don't know if de Grigny does, like, he does one on the Pange Lingua, right? And so I'm sure, and then there's also Protestant ones who do some on the Pange Lingua as well, because there was some, connection there. Is that, or was it the Verbum Supernum or In Dulce Jubilo, like, at that time, early Baroque, were those just melodies that were super widespread, and so they were relatively the same? Because I can see even on the organ that there's slight variations, whether or not they fill in thirds and stuff like that. But you can still see there's a structure that you can kind of tell, oh, that's Conditor Alme Siditorum, or however you say that. Like you can see, like, oh, that's that chant that Bach is working with, or de Grigny, or Marchand, or whoever. And so, with stuff like that, were they just super popular melodies at that time?
You do have this, definitely, but for hymns, you have so many different settings, different musical settings. And you can have also a simple one that will make a beautiful contrast with a very virtuosic organ piece. But of course, you will also, sometimes the text is the famous part and the widespread part. But some places can be very proud of their own musical setting. For example, in the world of confraternities, which is, of course, the church has always been kind of having this love-hate relationship, I would also say, with how the laity can do liturgies or parallel liturgical elements. And so this confraternity will have a tantum ergo that is not the official tune, but it is a tune that is extremely enjoyed by so many people. So you can have those widespread tunes, but they're not the only ones, and mostly they do not have this like licit or illicit way of thinking about them, as we nowadays do in Gregorian chant. Sometimes when I go on this Musica Sacra forum, I'm just like, wow, it's I can understand, but it's so far from the way that it used to be understood during the history of liturgical singing in the church. So it's really centuries of creativity, of invention, permanent invention, and when you have a good poet in your parish, you want him to write a new hymn, for this feast, or something that will be sung before the Kyrie on the same melody, with these tropes. It's always new things are being created because we know that this is the way we express praise, and our gifts bear fruit, So it's really sometimes you can fear that just a recording would be enough for them, like a perfectly sung thing, with nothing going, over the top, and that would be it. But of course, from a medieval perspective, it doesn't make sense.
Interesting. So it sort of sounds like there were some hymns that were super popular, so the sort of the germs of the melodies you could find across different national boundaries and over even centuries, because they're just super popular melodies. And like there were a few chants, like some of the Sanctus, like perhaps the Sanctus that you mentioned, that might have more of a universal status. But then there were tons of variations within the Latin hymns, as well as especially the Kyriale, which were vastly different from region to region. And so let me then keep going through the history. So then the Solesmes monastery, right? They sort of put together an amalgamation where they're trying to find like the germ of as many of these melodies as they can. And then they say, this is what Gregorian chant is. This is the Liber Usualis. And so what it does is there's a unifying aspect in that now everyone starts to sing some of the same melodies, but there's a sort of a tragic aspect in that you lose regional variety. Is that right? And
Definitely.
then my follow-up question would be like, what good did Solesmes do? Like, what do you, I mean, I know you have a different approach than what comes out of Solesmes, which frankly, aesthetically, I prefer if I'm listening to the way they sing Solesmes versus the way you sing Gregorian chant. But what good did they do? Like, what do you appreciate about Solesmes, or should I appreciate about Solesmes?
That's a great question. I would say Solesmes is, so when Don Guéranger, who is the founder of Solesmes, creates this new abbey, they're almost the first monks to come back to France after the French Revolution. And so they immediately ask the question of, what do we sing in church? Now, what is our repertoire of liturgical singing? Of course, in their time, there is plain chant that is being sung in other parishes, and they can listen to it, but they dislike it. For them, they're looking to uproot everything that is either the fruit of the revolution or that led to the revolution. So this is why there's this going back to the Middle Ages, and they're not the only ones. In music, of course, but in the other arts, so many people are going back to the Middle Ages in this period, just as the period that we're in right now, to look for inspiration. And of course, we know that in architecture and in painting and in many other things, the actual relationship between their works and the Middle Ages are very different. If you think of Viollet-le-Duc in architecture, or the pre-Raphaelites, wow, how to say this in English? Of course, it's very different. But so it's really a moment where people are looking for this. What happens at the same time is that you have the scientific method that goes into the social sciences. History as a science evolves. Now it's not so much about investigation of what you can see nowadays, but it's about making tables. So, and also they have the photography that happens at this time. So they send monks to many, many libraries, and they take pictures of all the manuscripts that they can find. Then they make tables, with the same piece, all the different manners that you can see it written. And then their ideological preset was to say, if you have 3 manuscripts and 2 agree on one si bemol, for example, and the other one writes something else, then the 2 are closer to the authentic tradition. And this other one is a corrupted version, is an altered version. And so this is how they try to go back and to choose something. But of course, now we know that whether it's on si bemol or si bécard or going to do, there's so many reasons for this, linked with modality, with pentatonic scales, with if you were in Germany, in German countries or in other places. So the idea is that they did an enormous amount of work, scientific work. And during the First World War and the Second World War, many libraries, again, were burnt. So some manuscripts we only know because the Solesmes monks took pictures. But they were not the only ones in their time. And what they managed to do is that indeed you have this aesthetic revolution, because even in the vocal placement, they and other with them, of course, you have Berlioz, you read his journals, he has many harsh words to say about liturgical singing in his time, saying that it was, way too loud and without any subtlety. They want to sing in a way that is very far from this. So this kind of angelic sound, but what are angels? But let's not go that way. This angelic voice, it's really what they want in their time.
Not harsh, not nasally, but also not bel canto, straight tony, but pleasant, right? Would that sort of sum up the aesthetic?
Yeah, very romantic. Claude Debussy he goes very often to Solesmes, and the work that he does is very influenced by this. So what I want to say is that we have this moment in the 20th century where they reach the Pope, and the Pope validates their work and publishes Graduale, so the books, the music for the Mass, and an antiphonary, so the music for the office, just one, and everybody has to use it now. And then, 60 years later, nobody anymore wants to hear about Gregorian chant. And it's not, in this case, it's not a movement from the top, because as you know, maybe in the documents of the Vatican II Council, they give room to Gregorian chant. It's actually the first time that in a council documents, Gregorian chant is being talked about and given the first place. But it's just that it's really a grassroots movement. It's just that nobody wants to sing that anymore. So for the people that are in the same tradition as I am, it's not a coincidence. It's also because when you try to uproot everything, when you say this is not normal regional variation, this is decadence, this is corruption, this is why they say restoration of the 19th century of Gregorian chant. But this is rewriting history. This is not true. This is just another aesthetic revolution in centuries of aesthetic revolutions. They're just trying to put it to their own taste. And then 60 years later, well, the taste is not this one anymore, so it just breaks. And immediately you have vernacular compositions that are also quite outdated nowadays.
Yes.
But it's...
a lot of the stuff sung in American Catholic churches is horrible.
I can imagine. Yeah.
The folk mass and all the... Yeah. I won't name the guy that wrote all the cheesy music.
Oh, there's one guy?
There's like one dude that everybody sings. It's super popular. Yeah. I'll spare his reputation, but it's just like, could we be any more corny?
But the thing is, it's really this pendulum movement, So for me, I'm glad I didn't live through this, and we can see many people who were glad with the reform, on many other ways, on clericalism, on the inter-religion dialogue. When you think of Dorothy Day, when you think of Thomas Merton, when you think of Ivan Illich, those people were kind of glad that the council happened. But for liturgy, what they write is that they're kind of scared of what's coming their way. But now it's 60 years later, and so it's a new situation. Nowadays I can see, I sing Vespers in a church that is very central in Paris. That is, it's Novus Ordo Vespers in Gregorian chant with Faubourdon, and our own way of singing it. Now we're in this new situation, so it would be good to not leave this huge repertoire and this huge traditions only to traditionalists who kind of do the same way, but for them it's as if the break will happen later, but it will eventually happen, because I was brought up in traditionalist world. I see that Gregorian chant is only enjoyed in most places for kind of patrimony, identity reasons, but they sing it very quickly, and then they sing Palestrina or something that they have more fun singing.
Yes. So it sounds like Solesmes, they did bring some attention to Gregorian chant at a time after the French Revolution where it was waning and there was less interest. Because I know, for example, like Widor, the composer for the organ,
Okay, I don't know that much.
after like his toccata from the Fifth Symphony is played like as the ending for a lot of people's weddings,
Okay.
But yeah, it was Charles Marie Widor, and I know that like his compositions change after Solesmes sort of comes about, where before he's just writing his own melodies, and then after Solesmes he's like, hey, let me use these Gregorian chant melodies. So then all of his organ works are based off of these Gregorian chants he got from Solesmes. And I think it's the same of like Tournemire, a little bit with Vierne. Like it did change organ composition because there was this increased, focus where there wasn't from the French Revolution. So it sounds like that was good. And a lot of the preservation stuff they did was good, but they were ultimately working with a faulty presupposition that there was this underlying core that could be extrapolated, and that's medieval Gregorian chant, and that's what's actually not so true. Actually, there was much more variety than we have typically thought of.
Definitely. And what's kind of strange is that indeed they were at the forefront of the scientific discoveries, one could say, in their time in the 19th century. But then across the 20th century, you have monks from Solesmes who begin to produce a work that goes against this method, this Solesmes method, as we say, of singing, where every note equals 1, except some equal 2, which is basically the gist of it. So you have monks who start to disagree. The most famous one is Doncardine. He works in Rome in the Pontifical Institute of Sacred Music, and he is credited to be the father of Semiology, which is trying to understand really the neumes, what those neumes mean. When I say neumes, I do not mean the square notation. when we say neumes, we
You
talk
mean
about
more like the diacritical marks?
yes, the
Okay.
which is not most of the time not on staves. Square notation comes afterwards and is not described as neumes. I say this because usually I see this confusion.
Mm-hmm.
So Don Cardin, you have Don Jean Clair, you have others, and you have one whom I spent a long time with, Don Daniel Saulnier. These people are from Solesmes, and they did not receive a lot of sympathy from Solesmes. And now the works of these monks is recognized in academic circles, but in Solesmes now they really went from saying, we know the most scientific, the most correct way of singing, to nowadays, I know because last week in Paris was this colloquium and their choir master came and he said, I know that scientific elements lead us to believe this and that, but you have to understand we're a monastery and we have our own way of singing and it cannot be uprooted just like this because you have, which is the truth, you have 80 monks and some of them are not singers at all and they do not have time to rehearse, but they sing all the time, so they need a very specific, simple manner of singing. And one could say this is exactly what you were being told in the 19th century by many places. You know, this is just how we are used to doing it, so of course you can do it differently, but just leave us this. There's a beautiful documentary, maybe you know about it. It's from 1946. It was shot in rural France. It's called Farbic. And it's very rural, and you see how they sing in the parish, and the guy sings one of the Kyrie from Henri Dumont. Maybe you know those Kyries, they're Neo-Gallican, so from
No, I
the
don't.
17th century. Henri Dumont, he was working with Louis XIV, and yeah, so he made those Kyrie and Kyriale for the parish. And they were quite famous, and so they were sung in many places for a very long time, instead of more Gregorian chant, Kyrie. And so in this documentary from 1946 in rural France, you see the main singer, and he sings it with a voice that you could not hear anymore, and that is very linked with what Berlioz and others were talking about. So just this to circle back to people saying, oh, what you're doing is Eastern. And we could say, just listen to this documentary, you know.
Just for the record, I wasn't saying it was Eastern.
No.
I'm just saying there's an aesthetic that is more, you know, like vocal production wise and ornamentation wise, that is more readily accepted in the performance practice of, you know, Eastern chant that I hear in your chant. I'm not saying it is Eastern. Anyway, just.
For sure. No, I understand definitely, but I'm being told this maybe once a day or
Really?
or yeah. So by, you know, this is well, when you show your work online, that's necessary as a reaction. But so we could say this is pre-romantic or something, you know, but this is really, when I sing, I do not try to imitate somebody. I just try to have the voice sound and fill the church without a microphone, without an organ. how shameful for organists now to just be accompanying, on the most silent of
the manuals. Yeah.
yes, and just making chords. How can one say that this is medieval? It's just crazy. Organs used to accompany the speech of emperors.
I want to ask about the organ too, but
You tell me if I answer too lengthily. I don't
no,
know.
it's great. Yeah, it's great. So I've heard you categorize like 3 methods, right? The Solesmes method, the pneumatic method, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is what you're talking about now. The monks who came from Solesmes. This is like Don Cardan. Is that who you said? Is that the pneumatic method?
Yes, we call
Okay.
it semiological approach because he called his science semiology.
Okay, so I know you've done videos on this, but for whoever's listening to our interview, and maybe we can get into maybe even a little more detail. What is the real difference between your method, the pneumatic method, and the Solesmes? I know Solesmes is like, these count a beat, these count 2 beats. It's very straight. It's very boring. There's no real ornamentation. But I'm not totally clear on the difference between like the pneumatic method and the method that you employ.
So the Solesmes method is, we could call it vehicular, like something that can travel, that does not need a choir master. Anybody can just
that makes sense.
find a book, and they've never sung this piece, but they sing it according to this method. So you have notes value 1, notes value 2. Notes valuing 2, they have either a point afterwards, more point, or they have this epizema, horizontal epizema. There's also this kind of ictus idea, where this beat should fall, but they're always afraid that it's too much of a beat. So they're saying you should do it, but you should also not do it. For example, let's sing this Salve Regina. Salve Regina, Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo, et spes nostra salvi. So now you just have this, it just really flows, and they go even faster. For the semiological approach, of course, you would not find this piece in manuscripts, since it's from the 17th century. Just a very short digression on this Salve Regina, because of course we call it the simple Salve Regina, and there is a solemn Salve Regina. Not solemn, but solemn. I hope you understand through my accent. Which used to be sung by monks, and at the end of Compline, of course, and it's very long. And so, of course, in the 17th century, in France, you have new orders which try to foster people singing, so that they will not have more fun becoming Protestants and singing their choral music, so they have their own choral music. And one of these orders is the Oratorians. And they say, nobody can sing this Salve Regina, it's way too long. So let's do a very simple one. And we have their score from the beginning of the 17th century. It's very different. It has a very precise rhythm. But it carried on so much that Solesmes included it in their book, but made it go through their own method of singing. But this long Salve Regina kept on existing in many places, but when you see scores that happened in several places, I have found them in different kinds of places. They will add another note, they will fill the third here, they will add this do dièse, when you're doing the cadence on re. It's many ways to make it more fashionable. So you have this coexistence of different things that work for different people. This is the end of the digression. So semiology has kind of a difficult situation, because people who work on it are musicologists who, unfortunately, more often than not, are not singers. So they do not really produce recordings of what they believe is good, or when they do it, you wish that they hadn't, to say it politely. I also have somebody in mind, but I will not name them. But you also have people who sing it, it's either in the more academic circles with singers who learn many things and they also learn Gregorian chant according to semiology. It's also made quite simple. I would say, for me, the main difference is that it's not the same notes that value who are the long notes. In the Solesmes method, it's depending on the epizema or the point. In the semiological approach, it's depending on the shape of neumes. But it's really sung in quite the same way. It's just not the same notes that are long. So this is why it's difficult for people of those two traditions to sing together. You know, sometimes it doesn't really work. I could show you an example maybe, or one of the good online resource for this is a website called Gregor und Taub. And so in Material, they have everything. So you see the piece with the Gregorian square notation and also with the neumes above it. It's a public resource, not public, but you know, it's available to everybody. So you see, you have Ad te levavi, which is the entrance piece for the first Sunday of Advent. Ad te levavi, animam meam. So in this square notation, they have taken out the solemn markings, so this epizema and the point. And now when you read the notation, you can see that on levavi, on va, you have this virga, which has also an epizema, perpendicular marking. So this one is a little longer. On animam, you have on a, you have first a pes, and then you have a virga with another epizema. And immediately afterwards, on ni, you have a virga without the epizema. Then on mam, you have this pes with liquescence, and you have a t, which means tenete, which means this also needs to be made a little longer. So really, when you listen to people singing in the semiological approach, it really can sound like Solesmes, but just with different rhythm interpretation. You know, so this one is a little shorter.
Do you mind like the first phrase? Like, how would that sound Solesmes method, and how would that sound semiological method? Or are they roughly the same? Is this one where they correspond super well?
So now this is the first sentence, Solesmes way. Wow, what you make me do is.
Sorry.
No, I'm kidding. But I used to sing Solesmes in Solesmes method for the first 18 years of my life. So you know, it's Ad te levavi animam meam, Deus meus, in te confido non erobescam. So I know that I had comments on this video that you're referencing, people saying, you're still making ornaments in your Solesmes. And I was like, I'm sorry, I really, that was not on purpose. So, you know, you see it's really, one could say it can be really flat, but it's really easy also to follow along. And another big thing that they have is that they can have 3 notes like this, and but they do not want this rearticulation. We know that one of Solesmes' scientific fathers, I would say, called Dom Potier, we have his book, and he says, I can see all these ornaments, but if they were to be done by a choir, it would be a mess, so we will not be doing them. Which is, you know, kind of sad.
Yes.
But understandable. So this other one with this semiological approach. Ad te levavi animam meam, Deus meus, in te confido non erobescam.
So that one I noticed you did do some more ornamentation. Was that just because you were singing it, or with the semiological approach, it's that philosophy is more open to ornamentation?
So they're more open to it, but it's just that for them they need to be explicitly written down. So it can be ornaments in the consonant. You know, it's like you bring the consonant on one whole note, ma, me, and not ma, me. You know, you can have a full note on the consonant, which is called liquescence. But also on non, for example, non erubescam, you have those which is called tristrophe. And so it's really just like 3 apostrophes, and it's written very differently, as you can see, than just 3 notes. So it's really called like this movement. You have this oriscus at the end of Deus meus. So you have, you know, like small things, but they say we can do ornaments if they're explicitly written down. What those people usually reproach to Marcel Pérès and other people in his tradition is that they say you're adding something. You're adding something to the score.
Okay. So your approach would add more ornamentation, and I feel like there's something rhythmic about your approach, but how would you sing it in the, you know, your philosophy of Gregorian chant?
So the way that I would approach a score is that first you pay attention to the text. It's very linked for us with the rhythm of psalmody, in the sense that the Latin text has stressed syllables. For us, we would never say ad te levavi animam meam, Deus meus in te confido. We would say ad te levavi animam meam, Deus meus in te confido. So it means that some syllables take more time and some syllables rush a little more. So this is the first step. Then you have the modal aspect, which means that some degrees, because of their modal function, are more important, needs to be made a little more intense, needs to be, but it's not about adding something, it's about revealing, you know, in this idea, which is that this is how it becomes understandable for people who listen to you. And then it's the third element is the actual shape of notes. So on animam, for example, the fact that you have 3 notes, the way that they're shaped, you know, will give me an idea of how to sing it. So if I were to sing it like this one, ad te levavi animam meam, Deus meus in te confido, non erubescam. So of course it takes more time. That's the main thing that usually people say. It's that it's longer. But we value this. We value the idea that in singing you have to take your time, mostly because it's ways of making it, marking the solemnity of the day. It's ways for the text to be understood. And it's also very much attuned with the idea that in this day and age, they did not have watches. So what is your understanding and perception of time when you do not know, when you only experience it on the duration level?
Well, I was just saying, I was speaking with a Coptic deacon, and they improvise a ton of ornamentation when they sing. And I asked him, and he said, well, there was a direct correlation to the solemnity of the moment. So if they were singing about Christ's sacrifice and they didn't ornament, then it would be considered inappropriate. they needed to add some melisma because this is a holy moment, so you need to add something to it.
If I'm starting to say, stand in the fear of God and listen to the Holy Gospel, a reading from the Gospel according to St. Mark, the Evangelist, may his blessings. You can strip it even more. That's probably somewhere in the middle. And you can make it much more ornate. But it doesn't make it better or worse or right or wrong. But if I were to extend the stand a little longer and say, stand in fear of God, it doesn't make it right or wrong. But there's kind of like a base expectation of what the appropriate tune is. And then some of these things are acceptable. If I go up there on a Sunday in a Coptic church and they ask me to read the gospel, and the gospel of that Sunday is the prodigal son, for example, and I walk up there and I just read it, that would be very strange. It would be a distraction. Or if I read it not using the appropriate tune, that would also do the same thing. Think of it as like the bumpers on down a bowling alley, maybe. You know, there's like things that we shouldn't do on one way or the other way, and there's like an appropriate range in the middle that we can kind of have some flexibility.
So it sounds like a similar paradigm.
Definitely. But the idea of adding something is scary for so many people. It's like, why are you now trying to put the spotlight on you and to show how good of a singer you are or something? But we can know that this is not at all the spirit in which this is done. You're just making use of so much that you know, that is in so many things that just make sense for this moment. And so that, once again, the points of the liturgy is that we forget that we are, it's not that we forget, but to try to make some of eternity reach us, so that when we're doing it, we are both today, but we are also, this is also happening in the same time as the original sacrifice was happening. And in the same time as the celestial liturgy is also happening. So that it's only happening out of time in the eternity of God. So that you really need to tear apart, you know, this sense of time.
Two questions. One, if an individual is just coming to Gregorian chant, maybe they've done Solesmes method their whole life, how would they learn to ornament like you do, or learn their own style of ornamentation? Like how would they learn it as an individual? And then the second question would be, if you have a group, let's say you have like your own schola, you're at a university, and you're like, you know what, we're going to do Gregorian chant in this method. How would you approach it in a group setting? Because I'm sure a lot of college choral professors would love to try out this method of Gregorian chant singing and not really know where to begin.
It's true. That's really difficult and great questions. I would say, so if somebody came to me, I would say there are two main things that you have to have in mind. First is that in this practice, it's by repetition, by imitation. You just join and you sing with us, and after some time, just imitating, just with those sympathy, you know, frequencies, you know, eventually we accord each other. And so, and it's exactly how I learned, you know, it was mostly by listening, by singing with others, by paying attention, by doing it again and again. It's a very lengthy process, but it's also about understanding what is the point of ornamentation and how can ornamentation be actually useful in the singing. Ornamentation is a way to go from one place to another place. It's how do you create, you know, you have contrary motion in the contrapuntic improvisation. But you also have contrary motion in the rhythm. When you're going to a long note, to a cadence, then the contrary motion that you can have is that immediately you go very quickly before. We see this in the organ, you know, you're not ornamenting sometimes it's written, you can just have the plus, or you can have, just a letter. But when you're ornamenting, you're doing it on a specific place for a specific reason. And I see some people, they love Ensemble Organum, and they say, I'm going to freestyle. I'm going to do it, just like a medieval Eastern. And it's terrible and it's shameful. And if they were to sing like this in a traditional setting, with singers who are good at improvisation, they would be laughed at as very proud people. It's you have to be in the service of the music, not just showing off. So ornamentation is also extra notes, that's for sure. It's not extra notes being sung in the same way. When you sing, the voice is here. When you're ornamenting, the voice is here. It's, for example, maybe you can hear that the main note is here and the ornaments is happening in the back, and very, very softly, very subtly. So there's this, but there's also the relationship with silence, which is an ornamentation. The way that you pronounce your consonants and how lengthy they will be is also ornamentation. The way that you will cut and immediately go back to the sound is ornamentation. All these things can also be something. So we need to have a wider taste for it. So there's the answers that I would give to somebody who comes to me, and actually it's a big subject in workshops that I give. Not a big subject, but always people say, I want to know how you do it. And at the end of the workshop, they kind of know how to do it. So there's this, but we have to understand that this is a music that cannot be sung without a teacher. You cannot be just in your own place and trying to come up with something. You can, but it will not be rooted in different traditions. So somebody who would just try, I would say, I understand the desire, but I really believe that you can find people in some places that can make you understand what is the point of this. Because once again, Gregorian chant is not an isolated repertoire. Modal music is, in many places, in many countries, a more folk, attentive to the text way is also existing in many places. So go and pay attention and try to create, links and bridges.
So like if you're like a music professor in Texas somewhere and you want to expose like your choir to Gregorian chant, would you say it's better to just kind of not just make it up and do something else, or should they take a stab at it and just know they're going to fail a little bit,
They can, that's for sure. But the idea is that there's a lot to learn, and it's also good to be in the spot of learning, and it brings many good things in the attitudes that you have then in liturgical singing. So you can try and look for something, but there are many people who can be good teachers for this. Who can dissolve false binaries or, these kind of things.
Would a group do as much ornamentation? Like, would you ornament as a group? Because I know you do some group stuff as well. Like, I've seen some of the Vespers that you've done with a whole group. How does that change the approach?
So I would say it's definitely there. It's one of the factors. When you're ornamenting by yourself or when you're ornamenting with a group, it changes, but it also changes if the group is singing monody, so just unison Gregorian chant, or if they're singing polyphony. But of course, in polyphony, you're trying to give room, because every voice has a different function, and so they're doing ornamentation in a different way, and so you want to hear it, so that we can hear the ornamentation of this middle voice, we can hear the ornamentation of the bass, and of the higher voice. So yeah, you have to take this into account. But for monody, you just go at it.
So if it's monody, like if it's this ad te levavi, you wouldn't necessarily ornament if you're doing it in a group. Or maybe you just pick a few places and you could be like,
you would need it to be more distinct. So to, for example, advocate that ornamentation only happens on cadences for the first part. But it's really just as a pedagogical element, because when you hear monody sung by a group who is experienced as singers themselves and as a group, then you can have something that is just the fully flowing voice. When maybe this in the Byzantine world, Byzantine chant world, in Romania, there's a group, a parish group led by Adrian Sirbu. They're in Iași. It's Eastern Romania. Their YouTube channel is called Chorul Byzantion. Okay. They're amazing. I saw them not just on YouTube but live. They're amazing. And for them, it's just always flowing. It's just full of voice, full of motion. It's just very, very, very beautiful. And mostly because there's this fun saying that I really like. They say Orthodox sing Mass and the Catholics sing during Mass. And of course that's very chauvinistic of them, but it's kind of not false.
Yeah.
According to both of our experiences, I would say. So yeah.
Well, so speaking of Byzantine chant, so 2 questions. One, what Byzantine influence is there in Gregorian chant? And then 2, there is a whole method now with Byzantine chant where they're very clear, we are not tuning this in equal temperament. And the third is flatter than you would think, and the intervals are somewhat wider, and so they're, they view it in tetrachords and they tune it to tetrachords, but sometimes the intervals are like 20 cent, 30 cent off of what you would expect. And it sounds cool. There's a whole group of people who hate that and say, no, we just do it normal. But I love there's definitely a different timbre there. And you find that in a lot of Middle Eastern music as well. So Syriac chant gets into the microtones, although maybe it's anachronistic to call it microtones because it's just the way those intervals are tuned when you sing it in that thing. It's like they're not thinking I'm singing a quarter tone here. So I guess those 2 questions. What is the influence on Gregorian chant in some places from Byzantine chant in Byzantium? And then 2, do y'all mess around with the intonation? And so 2 kind of different questions, but
this is so wide-ranging as a conversation, but that's very fun. I hope I can give convincing answers to this. I would say the influence of Byzantine chant in Gregorian chant has different stages, but it's here because we're talking about the first millennium when the Eastern Empire and through the Greek heritage was the most reputable place. You have, even when Rome tries to detach and to gain its political autonomy, you still have a Byzantine presence very strongly. In Italy, you have all the south part of Italy, which is Greek speaking. Mm-hmm. So many things. And Boetius, so this Latin theoretician, he translates works from the Greek and he tries to adapt it, and his own work will become extremely seminal for the Carolingian and Gregorian world. So for all of them, the heritage from Byzantine chant is extremely important, and the names of the modes are linked with Greek words. The names of the neumes are linked with Greek words.
Like Dorian, Hypodorian, all of that?
No, I mean the actual medieval names, which are Protus Atlanticus, Protus Plagalis, and these kind of words. Those words of modes are actually Renaissance modes. So
okay, interesting.
All of this to say that the influence is very strong, and mostly because Old Roman chant, so the chant that was going on in Rome at Pippin the Short's time, is very close to Byzantine chant, because in the sources that we have, and that was the work of Marcel Pérès, you have pieces that are the same, that are in the Byzantine chant repertoire. You find them in the Old Roman chant manuscripts, most notably because they are in Greek, but also because the music is the same. We have this, one of the famous instances that is coming our way is the Alleluia from Christmas. Alleluia. This is a shared piece. They also sing it in the Byzantine world.
Wow.
So, and this is the Gregorian Alleluia for Christmas. So yes, the influence is definitely very present. But so to what extent? There is the presence of microtones, and not necessarily microtones, I would say quarter tones or like semitones. So, you know, like less than a tone, but different shapes. We can see this in one manuscript of the 10th century called H159 from Codex Montpellier. It's a famous manuscript because it has the neume notation, and it also has alphabetic notation underneath. So when they found it in the 19th century, I can tell you they were pretty amazed that they felt it was like this Rosetta Stone that they could use to understand the melody of the oldest manuscripts. And you see that in the alphabetic notation, they use different letters for the B note, whether it is high, so bécard, whether it is low, so bémol, or whether it is in the middle.
Okay, interesting.
So you really have this.
And this is Gregorian chant.
This is Gregorian chant. Yeah. And of course,
Wow.
this, because the B is a mobile degree. Between the A and the C, you have this third, and it's called a PN, you know, in ethnomusicology. When they look for different modal music, they see there is a mobile degree. It's something that you see in many places. It's either high or low, and sometimes it's not even fixed in the same piece. So it's not an accident. Sometimes it's high and sometimes it's low. So you have those things. They tend to disappear with the invention of the stave, because the stave, of course, is almost like prison bars. You know, it's very helpful, but there are many things that get lost in translation.
This was a big problem when they were trying to preserve Georgian chant, because they almost lost all the Georgian polyphonic chant because of various wars, but then especially when it was, you know, after the communist revolution, and they started just shooting priests everywhere, and so there was like basically 6 guys in Georgia who preserved everything that we still have of Georgian polyphony, but they didn't know what to do with it because they obviously didn't tune to 12 notes. So it's like an approximation to kind of try to fit onto a staff because it was an oral tradition.
No, but it's true that, of course, the equal temperaments that we have is linked with keyboards work and with tempered instruments, but medieval instruments, of course, the organ notwithstanding, are usually not tempered when you have this viella, or you have, even with the organistrum, you know, that I have worked with in the past, you can really play a lot. And, you know, for me, it's kind of strange because I never studied music. And the music that I sing is Gregorian chant, and that's it. So I do not have in the ear, you know, the equal temperament. And so for me, sometimes they say, but why are you doing a microtone on this? And I'm like, I didn't know I did. I'm just, you know, I'm just going through this note, and you know, if for some reason I do not reach, you know, where it should be, since you're in monody, it doesn't really matter because it's about the movement that you're in. So it never. And when you sing polyphony, of course, it's more difficult, depending if it's, you know, like how many voices is it. But I never sing Renaissance music and these kind of things. Not that I don't like it, but the occasion doesn't really come, and also you need people who kind of sing like you. I never get booked. I would say it rather that way. I never get booked in Renaissance choirs.
Well,
For
is
some
there an
reason.
approach to the like, could you take somewhat of your approach and do it in Palestrina, or maybe slightly before Palestrina, but like in early Renaissance polyphony, could you sing it with more of a folk vocal production with added ornamentation? Like, is that a thing, or is...
That's a good question. I don't know of anybody who tried to do it, because when Marcel Pérès, he recorded many different works of many different epochs, but he, I think the only Renaissance work he did was Okagem, and it's quite pre-Renaissance. And then he does Baroque Gallican music. So I don't know. I would be very curious. I hope the occasion comes my way. So to see for something. But so all of this to mean that definitely when you're in monadic movement, many degrees do not resemble equal temperament. If it's because ornamentation is imprecise. So nowadays you have people who really use the Byzantine understanding of music for Gregorian chant. The most famous of them is Damien Poiblot. Maybe you know this man. His ensemble is called Les Chantres du Toronnet. It's really beautiful, but it really sounds to our ears, of course, since they pay so much attention to this non-equal temperament, but still very precise temperament of the Byzantine chant. So their critics usually say that they're just Byzantinizing Gregorian chant. Of course, it's more than that. Yeah, so they're the biggest representative, I would say, of this current.
I was going to ask another question, because you're talking about instruments, and so it's sort of like keyboard instruments that force equal temperament. Now, I've seen you do chant with the hurdy-gurdy, which I love the hurdy-gurdy, and also with a drone, and also with a was it called a serpent?
Yeah.
So what are those, just varieties that you could do whenever, or are there situations that call for the use of each? And then I'd also love your opinion on organs, but we'll get to that next. So first, hurdy-gurdy, drones, and serpents. When to employ the use?
I just light something because it's getting quite dark here. So this instrument that you're referring to is actually the ancestor of the hurdy-gurdy, because the hurdy-gurdy is just one person, and it's supposed to be quite light because it's for jugglers. It's for traveling musicians. Okay. The instrument that we use is called this organistrum, and it's two people. So you have one who is like pulling the pegs, I would say, and you have somebody else who is turning this wheel.
Okay.
And it's much bigger, and also you have to do it sitting. And in the European Middle Ages, of course, sitting is for nobler people, and remaining standing is for less noble people. So there's this big thing. Organistrum is for singers in the church, and the hurdy-gurdy is for others, even though Marie Antoinette eventually played it. It's another story. So we know it's a pedagogical instrument for improvising organums. So organum being this style of polyphony that happens in 13th century Paris, well, 12th and 13th century Paris, where you take the Gregorian chant, they said in this time plain chant, of course. You take the notes and you hold them for a very long time. You hold one note for a long time while somebody improvises. Then you go to the second note and they improvise, etc. So this is how it moves. And of course, when you're trying to look for ways, you will not have somebody singing because it's very tiring. And so you will have this instrument, which is this infinite bow technology. And no copies, no medieval copies exist anymore. It's the fascinating work of this branch of Luth workers. They just have statues. And so just based on the statues, they try to understand how it used to sound. So it's really amazing.
Wow.
So so this is for specific music for this organum, because it's also there's this idea that instruments were looking for a sound that was very close to the human voice as possible. For them, what is noble is the human voice, and the instrument has to come close to it. So there's this big idea of how do you use the sound of medieval instruments to understand what could have been the medieval voice. And voices, of course. So we don't have precise answers, but we know that it was not bel canto and lyrical technique, which of course have their own objectives. You know, it's that you're in a big hall and you have 40 instruments and you need to sound more powerful than them. So yeah, the serpent is a fascinating instrument also that is linked with a Neo-Gallican plain chant, Baroque plain chant from the...
This is just French, right? Like, I haven't seen the serpent really anywhere else, but maybe I'm wrong. You know.
England, they also have the serpent, but I wouldn't be sure 100%. And so it's a great instrument because it's wood. But mostly it was very famous and received no improvements during the 2 centuries that it worked. So basically from the end of the 16th century to the end of the 18th century. It is used in church, and they did with a spectrogram, you know, trying to understand, and they saw that the sound of this instrument is only low frequencies. So it never covers the voice, but it's always just enriching the voice that is already emitting. So this is why it's just this beautiful round sound that just, you know, strengthens the voice, but never will impede on it. So this is how it could remain legitimate. and then it disappears because it's being replaced with instruments that are louder, more mechanical. So all of this is always linked with fashion, and...
So it just fell out of fashion. That's kind of why people don't really use it anymore. I read something. It was one of the French organist composers, and they were complaining about the horrible sound of the serpent. But then I listened to your video with the serpent player. It sounded perfectly pleasant to me,
You mean you listened to my video with the best serpent player that is currently living and thought,
okay,
wow,
well,
it sounds nice.
Maybe fair enough. Maybe if it was the worst serpent player living, it would sound bad. But it's like timbre's a weird thing. You're talking about instruments trying to sound like the voice.
Yeah.
There's the vox humana organ stop, which is a reed stop with tremolo. So there's tons of vibrato, and it's reedy. It's like every vox humana I've ever played doesn't sound anything remotely similar to the human voice. So I don't understand,
Maybe at some point it became poetic, just like in this piece of Marin Marais, called Les Voix Humaines, Human Voices. I don't know. It's for sure strange, but I know that they did not write this anymore in music treatises in the Baroque period, but you can see this in medieval treatises. I would say that we know that the serpent was being given in parishes to the boy who can't sing.
Oh, okay.
So maybe that's why, you still need to have a musical ear so that it can sound well. And also it's quite difficult to transpose because, of course, there's no pitchfork. And it is always recommended that you will use the pitch that works for everybody. There is no absolute pitch. When you see written A, you should not be singing an A in 440 hertz. Of course, you should. It's just an indication of relative intervals. So they always say if there are more basses in your choir, then you should lower the pitch, but still remaining in this relative relations. But of course, the serpent has some holes, and so when you're trying to transpose, it's kind of difficult. So if you're not very good at it, it can sound terrible. But there were serpents. We know there were also contrebass. I don't know how you say this in English. And, I would almost say viola da gamba or something. You're always surprised between what they recommend and what they advertise, and then what you actually see in, like the salary papers you can find, and you say, oh, this man who played the contrebass was actually being paid to play in church during the service. So, it's always fun.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So then I have to ask, because so I'm Anglican, but I have a lot of Orthodox friends. And all of the Orthodox, they will rail against the organ. Now, granted, I'm an organist, so I love the organ. And they will say the organ, it was this super late invention, so it can't be a part of Orthodoxy because it doesn't come until the 1600s, right? But I know there's these little portative organs, and it's a big question mark as to when they were used to help the singer sing. And I think there's some speculation it could have been super early. And then I was talking to a Malankaran Syriac deacon, and I have not been able to substantiate this quote. But he mentioned a quote from, I think a Syriac church father from the 600s that mentioned using organ to help the voices sing. And it's funny you mentioned King Pippin, because I think King Pippin was given an organ from the Byzantine emperor. So what's your opinion on when the organ started to be used in church and the appropriateness of the organ to accompany chant to begin with? Do you have any hot takes on that?
I do, because Marcel Pérès, he is an organist, and he is really interested in this history. But I'm not an organist myself. So of course, I'm not saying this is the truth. I'm saying this is what I remember from what he is saying, from what others are saying, etc. The organ as an instrument begins in the 3rd century, of course, before Common Era, with the work of Archimedes and other people.
And you got the hydraulis and the...
Yeah. And then there is this example of this organ that is being given to King Pippin, or Charlemagne. I don't remember which one, but anyway. And then this organ breaks or something, or disappears, or anyway, there is the desire to make a new one. And they're looking for people in Western Europe who can build an organ, and they do not find this person. Until there is a story linked with Pope Sylvester II, and so a new organ is able to being built, and it's called nowadays this Roman, maybe Romanesque, from the Roman art, not from Rome, the city. And so you have, it's with air, like you pull this, and then it gives air, just like a harmonium. Right. And you have, like also pegs that you can pull, and you have those, and it makes a very beautiful sound. So you have examples in this time, but, and then we have elements of the organ being present in Notre Dame in Paris, also in the 13th and 14th century. I don't remember at the time right now who was working on this, but it's always, once again, the thing between what is being advertised and what is actually happening. So, and well, one could say we see this also in theology, the difference between what people say they believe and what they are actually thinking and doing. So it's the same with music. But every time that we see the organ, it's not playing during the singing, of course. First, because it's not legitimate enough. And also because it cannot really work, because it's with a temperament that doesn't really work with the voice. So we see this practice of the alternatim for the hymn and for the Magnificat, mostly for Vespers, but also in the Mass for the Kyrie, the Gloria, the Sanctus, the Agnus. The organ usually begins, and then you have the second verse is being sung by the choir, then the organ, etc. And this is how it's and the organ is expected to improvise something that modally corresponds to the music that is being sung, and to reveal all the potentialities of this simple unison verse. So the situation that we now have, which is the organ accompanies so that the tone will not go too low, it's kind of sad. And I would say it's just a matter of coincidence that they're using organs for this. It's just because the organ is already present. But they could be using any other instrument to do this. We have
they could be just droning on the organ.
Yeah.
Right? I guess, could they have done that super early with the chant?
I don't think so, because
you don't think so? Okay.
The place of instruments in the church it really takes time to be legitimate enough. Even with polyphony, you have everything that is taking us away from just the text being declaimed has to be legitimized profusely. But I am not an expert at all on Byzantine chant. So, I wouldn't be able to answer for them.
Now, with just droning itself, has that always been a practice? Someone droning underneath someone else singing a chant? Or has that been controversial at times? Or when do you do it? When don't you do it?
It's a good question. I would say what is fun is that when droning appeared or reappeared in chant in the 80s, many people were disagreeing with it and are still disagreeing with it nowadays, but it produces such an effect on the listeners. They feel like suddenly what you're singing, it becomes very mystical, and so strange and beautiful that now you see it very, very widespread, which is kind of fun.
Oh.
we have some elements of evidence that it was being used. Of course, in Old Roman chant, we have those elements. And for Old Roman chant, they call it's one type of organum. They call it basilical organum. And it's from a modal point of view, it's very basic. It's just that you have this fundamental note that keeps on being sung, and then the piece, just goes through it. But conceptually, it's extremely close. So there's this. We know that it was being used in Old Roman chant because in the manuscripts there's a moment where they say this piece sine organum. So of course, when you say this one, do not do it. So what does it mean for the rest? There are also documentation of Roman singers teaching this basilical organum to Franks and making fun of them because they cannot sing. Yeah, I mean, Jacques Viret, he's a musicologist in Strasbourg. He has produced books which holds all the elements of evidence, all the pieces of evidence that we have nowadays. So we can say that it could be present, but it was never really advertised as such. But just like so many things, what is difficult is that for them, they do not advertise what is obvious for them. What is obvious is not written. Because you're always trying to save space, to save paper. Yeah, it's kind of difficult. For us, I would say we use it, but in rare occasions. Because it does produce an effect, but at some point you only hear it. So it's just a choice that we do for us. It's quite strong as an effect, and you need to know which notes you will actually be holding. Because of course, if you're in D mode, you can hold the D. Sometimes it goes to C, so you have to move the drone. But
right, which they do in Byzantine. It's like they have one, but then they move it, and then they come back, and then move it again.
When you're in E mode, it feels kind of strange to hold the E because the voice usually goes lower than E. So the effect that you have when a drone is high and the melody is low is kind of strange. So either you go through it or you hold the drone on the lower A, so that when you reach the E, you're on this fifth. So you always have questions to answer. I would say it would be too bad that this drone would be used as if to hide the fact that the melody is not really being sung well. But it can help, that's for sure.
Now you mentioned D mode and E mode. One of the other questions I had was, and you just mentioned before there's these proto modes, or I forget the word that you used, but then later you have the designation of Dorian, Hypodorian, Phrygian, Hyperphrygian. You have the plagal modes. And then at some point you get Ionian and Locrian, and I'm not really sure where those come from. And so is there a simple sort of designation of when you go from the early classification to regular and plagal to where the heck did Locrian come from?
That's a good question. I would say, as I was saying, these are Renaissance words. So in the medieval times, in their books, the first mode, which is D mode with A as a dominant. You say dominant?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Tonic and dominant. Tonic is the home and dominant.
Yes. So D as the tonic and A as the dominant. We do not say this in Gregorian chant. We say la teneur, which is the home, and we say this recitation string or recitation degree for the dominant. But I'm trying to make myself understood. So they call it protus authenticus. If it's D mode, but not going to A, but not and going also lower, they call it protus plagalis. Okay. So these are the words that they are using, and you have deuterus, you have tritus, and you have tetrarodus. So these are the four modes, each mode having within themselves a mode that goes high and a mode that does not go as high.
So it makes 8 modes, but it's really 4 authentic, 4 plagal.
Definitely, yeah. And so in the Renaissance, they give them, of course, because of the humanist movement and going back to the classics and trying to get better at knowing the Greeks and the Latin, they give them names that ring a bell, that are less ecclesiastic, but that are more classic. But for them, they also say they also have 4 more modes, because you have 12 modes total, right? In this
Maybe.
Locrian and Phrygian and Dorian and Mixolydian.
So, like I've read some Gregorian chant handbooks, right? And on those there's the 8. There's the authentic and the plagal. But then, I played a little bit of jazz. And so with jazz, there is no plagal modes. There's just then it's Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. And so it's my understanding has always been that if you're going back to the way it was really done, Renaissance, that Ionian, Aeolian, and Locrian don't really exist. But those are sort of just anachronisms that have been placed on top to explain modes for a theoretical function that's super useful for jazz and other things. But maybe they came from somewhere else, because jazzers also have different names for stuff. So
they do. So it's very basic. Actually, it's linked with what we call solmization, which is just a fancy word for transposition. Which is to say that in Gregorian chant in the Middle Ages, when you have a D mode, you can write it on A. It doesn't matter for them, because the idea is that you have from D to A with a minor third in it. So if you're actually writing from A to E with a minor third in it, with the C, for them it's still the same mode. So there's no difference. The reason why they will write in A is that they can use the B flat. Of course, there is no E flat in Gregorian chant. So when the oral tradition knows that the second degree is actually lower in this moment, they will write the piece in A and not in D, but for them it's the same.
Okay.
So when you have this Renaissance, they will give another name to a mode that starts on A. It will not receive the same name as a mode that starts on D.
Okay.
Just so that, because it's fixed, because the pitches are fixed, when in Gregorian chant they aren't, but also modes in Gregorian chant have other elements. They have formulas. When you're composing a piece in a specific mode or singing a piece, it has formulas that you can find in other pieces of the same mode. So this is how it all connects.
Would these be different in different regions, these formulas, or these formulas are more universal?
They're quite universal in the repertoire.
Okay.
But they will not be used necessarily in the same place, and depending on the size of the text. And mostly you have this idea of ethos, which is the effect that you're looking for, that you're looking to create in the person who listens to you and also in the person who sings. So I think that they use those new words so that they can talk about modes detached from all the preceding understanding that exists in Gregorian chant.
So because the new designation sort of just it strips away all of the historical baggage of the mode, so you can it gives it a new identity that you can work with.
That's what I would say. Yes.
Okay. I have 2 remaining questions, if you don't mind.
Sure. Do you still see me? I feel like
you're a little dark, but I can see you. It's like candlelight. The vocal production that you do. So it's definitely, how would you categorize it? Because it's not bel canto and it's not solemn. How much thought is given to it, or would you just say it's like a folk style vocal production?
I think I would say that I try to use all that can resonate in the mask, as we say, which is in the front of the face. I try to send it more in the front. The main thing would be that I try to have everything that can resonate. However, trying to have a quite narrow harmonic spectrum. You know, I'm not trying to have it as wide as possible, but I'm trying to have it, more dense and more narrow. I'm not advocating for everybody to do it like this. I'm just saying that for what I do, it works. But, when I listen to Corsican singers, they have their own way. You really deal with what was given to you. The second biggest element is that we sing without microphone, without amplification. So you're trying to use the space and the acoustics of the space. So choosing where you're going to sing, of course, and choosing how can you enter in a dialogue with the stones of the church so that they can also answer you. You see this, of course, in psalmody. When you sing a verse, then you cut, you hear the answer of the stones, and then you carry on with the second part of your verse. So yeah, I would say in many places the lyrical voice in a church can be way too loud because those churches were not necessarily built for that. And when you say church, do you mean Roman church? Do you mean Gothic church? Of course, when you go from Roman to Gothic is also when you go from monody to polyphony. And so you also build a church that is a good home for the polyphony being distinguishable. If you sing organum in a Romanesque church, that's very mushy and terrible. So I would say it's also paying attention to these things. I did tour the US 2 years ago with a liturgical group, and we sang in there are so many different kinds of parishes, and in many you can be really helped with the singing, and in many others I don't think how you can do it without a microphone. It's just very tiring. So when you sing in a microphone, of course you sing very differently because you can be very soft, you can have, those small nuances. But when we sing, we try to have emission of the sound, and then the sound stops. But you never have, those nuances of volume. You can have nuances in the prosody, in the way you shape syllables, but it's always the sound is full, and then the sound cuts. But you never have ad te levavi. You never have those, the sound dying down. So it's always about how do you manage to have this thing that is in front of you. That's what I would answer. And also that 95% of the people who sing in church would benefit from any singing lesson. Anybody, any singing teacher can make you go very far. Not I would say not very far, but can make you really competent in what is expected of you. And when you're just discovering your voice and what you can do, any teacher will give you good advice on the breathing, on the posture, and etc.
Sure. Also wanted to ask, like, the Sarum rite. So is there any existent Sarum music that we can point to? I mean, it's sort of the same question with Ambrosian, Mozarabic, Gallican. Are there people that are just championing these individual styles, that are doing the research and trying to reconstruct what they can reconstruct from those times? And so, like, is there any extant Sarum music, for example?
I was in Ireland not so long ago, and I was told of a group who works on this. I know that since I'm not in this Anglophone world, it's true that I did not really research this Sarum rite. I know that it's also kind of got replaced in many places by Gregorian chant in the second half of the Middle Ages, and then of course it's with the Church of England was replaced.
So let me ask then, because this is great. This touches on what we were talking about earlier. Sorry to jump in, but you were saying it got replaced by the Gregorian chant. But Gregorian chant is also not one thing, because there's a tremendous amount of variety everywhere. So that seems confusing to me, because I would think if it's Sarum rite, that Sarum would just be a part of Gregorian chant, and Gregorian chant would just be like a name for all of the chant of Europe in some sense.
Well,
what am I missing? Do you understand my confusion?
I do. So you have regional rites, as we were saying. The Roman rite is like the successful regional rite. The Sarum rite is another regional rite. And then you have regions as a geographic, and you have regions as, one would say, monastic orders. So the Gregorian chant is the chant of the Benedictines.
Okay.
But Dominicans have a different chant. Dominican chant is different. It does not have the same books, does not have the same pieces for different times of the year, does not have the same melodies. You have the same with Cistercian chant, also, is different. Carthusian chant, also founded by St. Bruno, is a different sort of chant. They do not sing Gregorian chant. They didn't used to sing Gregorian chant, I would rather say, because now it's, of course, a kind of difficult situation. So the Benedictines have very strong advocates in the Clunisian order. Okay. So those monks of Cluny who become extremely powerful in the 11th century because they make, one could say, almost a business out of praying for the dead. So the richest people in Europe say that when they are dead, they give everything that belongs to them to the Clunisian order so that they will celebrate masses for them. Of course, they do not really give so much while they're still living, but they give when they're dead. And so the Clunisian order becomes owner of many territories in many places in Europe. And they bring their own canons and monks. And so they also reach many places. They actually replaced this Mozarabic chant and in other regions. So as far as I understand, in England, it's also the same. And so this is how it replaces, so that you used to use this book with this song at this time and this melody, and now you will use that one. And and also because the Mass is not celebrated exactly in the same fashion. So you would need different songs. For example, the Mozarabic Mass is very different. Well, very different. It's quite different from the Roman Mass. Not, of course, in the fundamentals, but in the way stuff happens, so you need different pieces. So if you have somebody from another order who comes to celebrate your Mass, it's either he changes and adapts to yours, or you have to adapt to him.
Okay. So the way I had thought about it before, which we had already sort of debunked earlier, but that like Pope Gregory or one of these popes right after him had sort of been an impetus for music notation, sent these books all across the empire and said, now this is the chant that you're singing, isn't really how it happened. But
it's very far from it, how it happened.
But what we view to be Gregorian chant in a lot of places is the Benedictine chant that came from the Clunisian order. And as they went to individual places, I'm just trying to summarize, make sure I understand correctly. As they went to places, they also brought with them sort of an imposition liturgically of, well, now Mozarabic liturgy, we kind of need to do the Roman rite. And Sarum rite, you kind of need to do the Roman rite. Which then, even if they were doing their own regional chant, like Mozarabic chant or Sarum chant, then because they've had to change their rites, they then have different music that they have to do. So that music then is from the Clunisian order, so that's Benedictine music. And then in addition, because they have all these advocates for their music because of the abundance of that order, then they started to shift towards singing that music rather than singing their own previous regional variants. And so then even in those places, there would still be regional variants, even of stuff that the Clunisians perhaps would have given. And that still preserves some sort of regional identity. And maybe there are some places where like the Clunisians had less influence and some places they had more influence. And so, and because of the influence of the chant traditions that they already had, that would explain some of these regional varieties. But the sort of ubiquity or universality of a Gregorian chant is primarily due to the preponderance of the Clunisian order. Is that right? Have I summed that up correctly? Because that.
Yeah. Great job. No, it's so. This is also what happens in the 19th century. It's just that some books get out of fashion, I would say, or feel illegitimate or are deemed inappropriate, illegitimate, and they're replaced with other books. And of course, the way that you write music, in the melody, of course, but even in the shape of the notes, implies also an interpretation. So this is how things evolve. I would say that what is the irony of the story is that in the beginning of the second millennium in Rome, because of their new, importance in the Western Europe, so many people from so many places come and they want to have their church in Rome. So very soon in Rome, you have so many churches with so many different people who are singing so very different music. And of course, the liturgy of the Pope, is stational, which means that he does not celebrate in the Vatican. Of course, he goes to different churches, and in this church, he celebrates this feast. Mm-hmm. And so we have accounts of people saying, the Pope is coming to our church, and nobody knows how to sing Old Roman chant anymore. And so they do not make use of their own cantors, and they go and try to find people who can sing Old Roman chant. So eventually you reach a point where the chant that had such a strong influence on Pippin the Short and the Carolingian world eventually gets replaced by Gregorian chant, which is more widespread in Rome. To the point that in the 13th century, Pope Innocent III even orders that books of Old Roman chant be burnt, because now Gregorian chant is to be sung. So we only know
Gregorian chant is not Old Roman chant.
No. Gregorian chant is a cross-fertilization between Old Roman chant, Old Roman, one could say, repertoire, and Gallican practices, because it is sung by Gallican cantors. So it's a mix between those worlds. You have the text and the general structure of melodies, but the ornamentation and the modal understanding is Gallican. Okay. And this makes Gregorian chant.
And what the Cluniasians are pushing, they're pushing Gregorian chant, not Old Roman chant.
Old Roman chant is being sung in Rome.
So whereas I thought of it as an imposition from Rome, it's actually sort of the opposite.
What do you mean the opposite?
So where I thought that what ends up being classified as Gregorian chant was due to sort of an imposition from Rome. Everyone needs to be singing Gregorian chant. But it sounds like it's sort of the opposite, because in Rome, they're singing Old Roman chant.
Yeah.
And it's what, just primarily the influence of the Cluniasian order that makes it Gregorian chant?
Well, there's this, that's for sure. But yeah, when Pippin the Short asks the Pope to come with his cantors, he obeys, but it's not his movement. He has objectives, he has hopes of this meeting, but in Rome they're not so much trying to make everybody sing Roman chant. So, and then it's really about the power of orders that are close to the Carolingian world, which is basically between Lyon, between Paris, and between one could say Cologne or Metz. It's this northeast area of France.
So had the Dominicans or the Cistercians been more powerful, would we all be singing Dominican and Cistercian chant?
Probably. Yeah.
Okay. But these are still like different chant traditions even today. So like with the Dominicans and Cistercians and Carthusians, like they're not reading from the Liber Usualis from Solesmes. They have their own.
They have their own books.
Their own chant books.
The vocal interpretation is very close to Solesmes now. So now it's just different melodies.
Because of Solesmes.
And because it's just so powerful and so easy to do. Those communities do not have also this oral tradition anymore. They just have this written tradition. So they sing à la Solesmes, different melodies.
Okay. I guess people would refer to them as Gregorian chant, but they would be wrong to do so.
They would be, yeah.
Okay, interesting.
But I wouldn't say anything if they didn't
Gregorian
ask me.
chant.
No,
Yeah.
no. The thing is,
very interesting.
a quick thing is that in the Benedictine order, you enter as a child. Well, of course, in the Middle Ages. So you have all this time to learn. You are expected to be a learned person. And to sing the office, it's huge in the Benedictine vocation, calling. Dominicans is an order that is much later, and that is for predication, and that moves around a lot, and that goes in cities, and they're really moving around. And you become a Dominican. You can become a Dominican as an adult. So of course you do not have this background. So we see in the 13th century, when the Dominican order is being founded, that they think very hard about how can we make liturgical chant that can be sung by everybody in our time, in our order. And we need to make it a little more simple, or have very precise rules. So you have this famous theoretician called Hieronymus de Moravia, who is a Dominican friar living in Paris. He wrote Tractatus de Musica. And in this book, he describes what is happening in the Dominican order. And you see, for example, their books, they have a lot of bars. You have, it's not measures, of course, but almost every word or every 2 words you have bars. There's a pedagogic element very strong to it. So no, once again, it's always different situations create different answers and ideas, and it's always like this.
Okay. And what are you excited about? What do you have coming that's getting you going?
Oh, that's nice of you to ask. Well, I just moved to Paris, so of course it's a new life. I was in Lyon before, and I sing Vespers now in this very central church, and we are
What's the
in
name
a very
of the church again?
Saint Paul, yeah. And the younger generation does not have. I mean, many people seem to care more and more about Gregorian chant, and not just people in the traditionalist world, and I would say even just in the church world. When I give workshops, I see that it resonates with artists from very different arts. You have people from the theater, you have dancers, you have musicians who are playing this drone organ music, maybe which is a big thing in Paris. You have very different kinds of people, and all of them want to understand, because it's also their tradition, and I'm really glad to be a part of it. And it's kind of surprising because it's all through Instagram. I used to, just for the sake of this fun story, I used to talk about it on YouTube before. And on YouTube, people find you because they're typing keywords. They type Gregorian chant and they see me and they're like, who's this guy? And just thumbs down. But then I moved to Instagram, and Instagram, you're just scrolling and you never know what is being offered to you. And so it was only people who had never heard about it and were like, who is this man? It sounds interesting and surprising. And so now it's almost as if I owe Mark Zuckerberg, a lot, because he wants everybody to be addicted to Instagram, and between a cat video and a cooking video, they see a Gregorian chant video. So yeah, that's a surprising situation. Can only happen now, and I'm glad to be here. So thanks.
Yeah, well, I'm glad it's happening. I'm glad you're doing what you're doing, and it's very interesting and beautiful, and I think it'll draw people
Thanks.
back to singing.
Yeah, I'm really moved by how deep your questions were and how prepared you were for this conversation. That's very nice of you. I don't think I've ever talked for as long as this. Well, if somebody has made it to this, wow, you're really the biggest nerd I've ever met. So, yeah.
Yeah, but it's great. I wanted to cover. I had a lot of questions,
Sure.
and I'm like, Bruno is the guy to speak with. So.
Well, but I could also give you names about other people who could give like other perspectives, because I just want to say this. I'm not saying singing Gregorian chant as it should be done. I'm within a tradition that makes sense for me and for people singing with me, and it's alive today. And what happens tomorrow, I hope people will care about it. But that's all I can say.
Yes, very good. Well, thank you for being here.
Soptom presidium conforgemus Sancta Dei Genitrix Sancta Dei Genitrix nostras deprecationes ne despicias in necessitatibus nostris Soptom presidium conforgemus Sancta